As much as it may pain me to take a break from my next piece, there is some place I have to go. I learned just a couple of weeks ago that I have a connection to the Sigal Music Museum in Greenville, South Carolina. I think we've all had at least one instance in our lives where we realized that we had some connection to someone or something that we didn't previously realize we had, and I recently had that experience. So I'm going to Greenville in part to go tour the museum and meet Dr. Tom Strange. I do not have the funds in order to just fly from Buffalo to any cool music site in the whole world just to tour it and bring y'all along for the ride. I mean, I wish I had that kind of money. No, I'm actually going to Greenville for other reasons, specifically a wedding. But I get to do this too. So, come along. Not to the wedding. You're not invited. I'm sorry.
Amazing. It's made an old cocoa plant.
Yeah.
A long time ago, yeah. It looks small now, though, but yeah, it's a cocoa plant.
A little piece of history. I'm here at the Sigal Music Museum and introducing one of the founders of the museum, Dr. Tom Strange.
Good to meet you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Thomas. So what you're going to see today is the highlights of the Marlowe Sigal collection of musical instruments. And so Marlowe was a person that I knew in life when we were both collectors. And we sometimes bid against each other at auctions. Marlowe typically won because he had deep resources. When Marlowe passed away, he didn't have a firm plan for his collection. And I knew Marlowe, and I knew a number of the curators from the big museums around the country. And so I was in the process of helping position the instruments in several museums when it became clear that there was going to be a great deal of cherry picking, and much of the collection probably wouldn't find a home right away, but the family was eager to move from the Newton, Massachusetts area. Ultimately, they came to us and asked us if we would take the collection. There was some negotiation back and forth because it was going to be a lot of money just to move it. It took 16 26-foot trucks.
Wow.
To get it all here. The end result is that we have some really wonderful holdings here. This virginal, made on or about 1575 by a rather well-known maker of the time, Giovanni Baffo. These instruments were actually made to come up out of this case, and they would usually be played outside of the case. It's very, very much intact from its original construction. The only difference being there's a little strip of wood here that had been lost at some point, and that's been replaced. And that allows the action to come out. There's quite a number of these virginals that have survived nicely with similar stands, although this is added 300 years later. You can get an idea of the sound. So it has that sort of early sound. There's a fair amount of wood that you hear in the action. Charles Burney famously said that as he toured the country of Italy, that these were everywhere to be found, but there was more wood than wire to be heard. He enjoyed picking on people and making these, kind of interesting remarks. Mm-hmm. All made of cypress, as the Italian instruments are, with boxwood on the top for the key tops, and then stained boxwood for the accidentals. Was kind of the material of choice for most Italian instruments from this period. Mm-hmm. And that would have lasted up until well into the 17th century. So we're going to contrast this little virginal with a full-size harpsichord. Tim Hamilton in Boston has brought it back. And when we bring these things back, it doesn't mean that large areas are replaced. In fact, everything that you can see visually is original to the harpsichord when it was made. Ivory with these accidentals that have been made up of wedges of ivory and ebony. The Italian states at the time had no trade with Africa. So for ivory to come to Italy, it had to go through another country. And it would have been treated as a semi-precious stone at this point. And so an ivory keyboard in a Italian harpsichord from the middle of the 17th century, the 1650s, is a very unusual thing to see. 2 strings for every note and a light silvery sort of sound. So a lovely little, sort of quiet voice, but sparkly at the same time. You see this interesting shadow traveling down the soundboard, and that shadow looks a lot like maybe this bridge was once here, and this is exactly what happened. So when the harpsichord was built, it looked, as you see it, strung in brass with the bridge in that position. But by the 18th century, the need for the harpsichord to have more keys and certainly a higher pitch had happened. They kept it in currency by moving the bridge back and then raising the pitch. By doing this, they ensured the rapid demise of the harpsichord. By the time Marlowe saw it, the soundboard was in ribbons. And we leave the shadow on the soundboard because that's part of its history. Here, we've moved ahead right at 100 years with this beautiful instrument here by Pascal Tascan. He is one of the greatest harpsichord builders in the world, building these very much the way the Flemish harpsichords were made, which is quite different than the way the Italians are doing. Typically more robust, not as elongated, compared to the width, but with a much bigger, really huge sound. Here are the jacks for the harpsichord. And as you can see, they're spread out so that we have a set of like tall jacks here in the front, and then another set of jacks that are pretty far back, and then something in between, which I will tell you are going to play the octave higher, the 4-foot jacks. And so what's happening here is the ones up close are going to be controlled by this upper manual. And the upper manual allows the instrument to play these. By plucking close to where it comes off the case, you're going to get a lot more harmonics. We get that wonderful little faraway sound. And we can actually just pull a jack up. And then you can see here is the quill, and the quill is inserted into this tongue, which is hinged, and behind it is a boar's bristle, the back of a hog. And so the boar's bristle makes the tongue pop back into place each time. And so the quill comes up and plucks the string and then falls back behind. Mm-hmm. And then this is the damper cloth for dampening when we get finished. You might ask, why 2 keyboards? What's the joy of that? Well, we've seen how the harpsichord works, and so what we would do is we would want to replace this. This is called the jack rail, and it keeps the jacks from popping up and out while we're playing. With the lower keyboard, I'm going to be making the jacks in the back pluck, and so that's plucking deeper into the string. So you can hear
fuller sound.
It's a fuller sound. It may well be that what you would like to do is have that faraway sound and the fuller sound coupled together. Mm-hmm. And you can do that very quickly. So the upper keyboard just pushes in, and now the upper keyboard will follow the lower keyboard. And if we want an even bigger sound yet, one of the things that we can do is bring in that middle set of jacks. And now every time I strike a note, I'm actually going to strike an octave higher. And it's set up so that I pluck high and then low, like a machine gun. And then I can bring in that upper set. So now I get this really huge harpsichord sound. And that was something that the French harpsichords were known for, is the truly full sound that they can produce. They can also do a buff stop, also known as the lute stop. So here's the buff pads here, and they're made of a type of elk leather that's very thick and very soft. And all I'm going to do is push them up against the string so that I get the string to sound, but it's dampened very, very quickly. When would you use that? Well, if you had a flautist or a soprano that's singing along, you might want to act the part of the bass player. And so you're just kind of giving a continual rhythm in the back. When you're doing something like a Bach cantata, you're going to have like 6 parts. You may well want to change things up as you're playing it so that it relieves the ear a little bit. Our next harpsichord is this English harpsichord, the wedding present from King Charles III to his new bride Charlotte when they got married in 1761, made by Jacob Kirkman. In this case, Kirkman, being an English maker with some Flemish tradition, said, yes, we want to have that lute stop. Let's put that, the Nazard, the kind of faraway sound, we're going to make a whole new set of jacks for that and have them plucked very, very close. You can hear.
It's almost like a sitar.
Yes. Very much sitar-like. And then again, I can bring in an 8-foot and pluck deeper into the string. But keep all that wonderful character. So here's an instrument decidedly made up so that it really amplifies all of those changes. It's also a very gorgeous instrument. You see all this inlay that's been added. This is one of 4 harpsichords that have survived by Kirkman that look like this. This would be the most expensive harpsichord that you could buy at the time. In today's money, this would have been a $400,000 investment. A lot of these people had sugar money coming from the West Indies, and so they had the money to spend. The eagle that you see here is in 27 different pieces of wood that have been cut apart, shaded in hot sand, and then put back together. When Mozart and his sister came to court, they played for the king and queen on this harpsichord. And of course, it's never just the king and the queen. The whole court's there for the presentation, but they were invited back twice. But of course, it has the same problem that all harpsichords have, which is you can't really play loud and soft. If I were to play very, very gently, or if I put on my Rachmaninoff and say I'm going to give it all my 4 arms and back, it's the same sound. And the reason being that the plectra plucks the string and the attack either happens or it doesn't. It's like an on-off switch. We have one here that as we look at it, we say, well, it looks like the other harpsichords except where are the strings? We can hear them. They're in there somewhere, but it sounds like it's in the back of a shoebox.
It looks like a box on an organ, like you hit a
Right.
swell.
So this in fact has the swell. So when I'm positioned, seated nicely at the harpsichord, I have the ability to swell the sound up and then let it come down.
It doesn't really change the volume of it as much as it changes the timbre.
It changes. Yes, I think you're really quite right. We also have a machine stop on the side, and there's another pedal. And what that will allow us to do is, as I begin to press the pedal, I start to pull the plectra away. So I go from full pluck to about half pluck to no pluck.
It's not just harpsichords at the SMM, though. We started our piano tour with a 1784 model by Johann Stein, a brilliant piano building innovator.
Stein is actually the inventor of what we now call the Viennese grand piano. He's building in Augsburg, Germany, but Vienna is the musical capital of the world. I can just push up on the knee lever, and now I have my sustain that I want. And another interesting point of this is that his daughter, Nanette, entered the shop at the age of 8, and this would have been made when she was 15. I strongly suspect that much of what we're seeing here is the daughter's work. When he dies in 1792, she immediately just takes over and the shop never misses a beat.
So miles away from the harpsichord in terms of timbre, but still very far into what we know today as the modern grand.
Still not what you would think of as the modern grand. This is the music desk. The silk covering is still original in this one, but we can lift it out and just set it to the side here. Remove the damper covering. And now as I push down, you can see the little hammers that come up. And so they're going to come up and strike the string and then fall away immediately. And they're only going to interact with the string for about 3 milliseconds, but that's enough to energize the string. There's not a lot of cushion here, and that gives it the distinct sound that it has, which is still silvery and beautiful, but it's a lot less fulsome and piano-like than what we would hear from something even 30 years later. Most compasses were F to F at this time. Occasionally you'll find one that rather than go down to F, it'll only go down to a G, or maybe sometimes even only an A, but typically you would have the full 5 octaves here, and we haven't got to the point where we're going as far down as a C. It's going to grow in the treble much faster than it ever will in the bass. So this F is still fairly low. We would later get down to a C and then ultimately to that low A that you're used to. Only a very, very few pianos built today have more than the 88 keys. A fellow has built one in Australia with 108 keys on it. So
at some point that just seems a little excessive.
Well, you can't argue taste. We'll find out how music history adopts it.
Eventually the piano did start resembling something closer to its modern form.
So what we have is the damper lift, which would be where you would normally expect on the right side, and then on the left side we have the keyboard shift. On a modern grand it goes from 3 strings to 2. On this one we can bring up this little tab on the side, and then when we push we can go all the way down to 1 string.
We then moved on to a piano by Anton Walter and Son, dating from around Beethoven's middle period.
We've come all the way up to an octave higher. Now we have 6 octaves. By the time Beethoven is writing his latest sonatas, then he's frequently asking for more in the bass, all the way down to C. We have the damper lift. We have the keyboard shift. We have the moderator. I can get something that's 4 Ps. And the sustain is just about right to play that great warhorse of Beethoven's, the Sonata 14 and C-sharp minor, the Moonlight. And Beethoven gives us some pretty specific instructions on that. He said, I want you to go to una corda, so the keyboard shift, and I want you to raise the dampers for the whole thing. When you do that on a modern piano, it turns to mud pretty quickly. But on an instrument like this, we can... On a modern grand, if I were to do what I just did, then they would tell me that I need to get off of that bench and go sit on another bench, maybe in the back of the room, because you do not know how to play a piano. And so it would sound terrible, you know, and nobody would do it.
What about that fourth pedal down there? That's some kind of effect pedal?
That's an effect pedal. So with the fourth pedal, if I'm playing along with a nice little march, we have lowered a bar here. And this bar is covered with a stiff silk. And they call that a bassoon stop. And I really like that idea of the sound effect of the silk, you know, crashing against the strings and making that bassoon sound.
It's a cool sound. I'm not sure I'd characterize it as a bassoon, but...
I would have said wasp in a paper bag. It's closer to it.
We then very briefly moved on to some of the more novelty keyboard instruments, like this piano harp.
This one was made, the style was made throughout the 19th century. And the idea here is to produce this sound that's sort of like harp and hall, but with a keyboard action rather than having to find a trained harpist. There is some dynamic range, and you have some pedals that help you with that. This one has not been worked on in any meaningful way. It isn't quite a pluck. What it does is, as you push down on the note, a little finger comes in, grabs the string, and then releases it. So it's not so much a pluck as a grab and release.
I call this next instrument Liberace's upright.
This is tortoiseshell with a fused gold bull work, which is a kind of a brass work that's been carefully cut out and tooled throughout. And it's not simply brass, but it's been coated with the amalgam of mercury and gold. So that makes it actually bond with the brass, and then they heat it, and it drives the mercury off and leaves the gold. It was wildly toxic, and when this piano was made, that's at kind of the end of the ability to actually do that sort of work. The French authorities shut it down.
At this point, we're up to A. It's A to A now instead of C.
Yeah.
There was just so much to see. Way more than can fit into this episode. This was just a sampling of the first floor in the wealth of knowledge that Dr. Strange had to offer. The Sigal has an entire second floor to explore, where we're going to go from seeing one of a handful of instruments to several one-of-a-kind specimens. I hope you'll join me and Tom upstairs next episode as our tour through Greenville's Sigal Music Museum continues.